Hello everybody and welcome to the James Leman Writing Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about guns. So guns are an interesting topic in fiction because you can have conservatism without guns, right? In that you can have a work that's set in a fantasy world or historical fiction set before the inventions of guns, so medieval period or earlier than that. Guns are material objects, right, that can exist or cannot exist, and whether or not they exist doesn't have any real bearing on the essential truths of conservatism, right? There is a God, there is a right, and there's a wrong. You can't have a conservative novel that's set in a world without God. You can't have a conservative novel that's set in a world without guns. Even so, I do think it's very difficult to be a true conservative without being pro-gun. In fact, I'm not even sure how someone would do it. Because as conservatives, we believe in protecting what is good and standing up for what's right. And in situations where enemies may be trying to force us to do things that are wrong or are trying to commit grave acts of wrongdoing by force, it is obviously necessary for us to respond with force. And in a world with guns, those are, let's just be honest, they're the most effective man-portable weapons that our society has currently available. So, of course, as a conservative, you're going to be pro-gun because you're going to want to be able to stop forces of evil dead in their tracks. So this brings us to the question of firearms in fiction and how you incorporate them as a conservative writer into your story in a way that is helpful and constructive. I think it's very important to provide a counterpoint to the way that firearms are often portrayed in pop culture today, because it's very clear that the way that they're portrayed in pop culture is often inaccurate, not helpful, if anything, likely to make gun violence in our country worse. And so they're pretty much always portrayed as these super weapons of doom, with a few exceptions, but I'll get into that. You need to, when you portray them, the main thing I'm trying to say here at the beginning of the video is when you portray firearms, you need to portray them accurately and get across what they actually are. Because they're such an important political topic, you don't want to be filling people's heads with nonsense about firearms. So in light of this, you want to portray guns accurately. Don't sacrifice accuracy for the sake of the cool factor in fictional storytelling. Don't have the main character duck behind a car door for protection, because almost any firearm other than a .22, including 9mm pistols, are most likely going to go through a car door and kill him anyway, right? Similarly, don't have everybody be shooting from the hip. That's stupid. You would never shoot from the hip. Have people actually looking down the sights when they're shooting, because that's what people do, even at relatively close ranges. Unless the guy's 2 feet from you, in your fiction storytelling, you need to have the character aim, right? And that doesn't matter if it's a fully automatic gun or a single-shot pistol, right? You always aim when you're shooting a gun. That's how that works. Nobody's hip firing except in extremely specific situations, like the guy's 3 feet from you. Then another thing I would say is don't have people, double slinging machine guns. That's retarded. That doesn't happen. Nobody does that. It also doesn't really have any serious advantage. People used to double sling back in the 1600s when they had a pair of flintlock pistols, right? Or the 1700s or early 1800s, because they only had one shot. Well, now they have 2 shots on hand. But when you have 30 rounds firing off at a fully automatic rate of fire, when you're firing full auto, you got 10 rounds coming out of that barrel a second, and you can reload it in 3 seconds. There's no point in shooting off 2 at the same time, and no one does that. Sorry, Neo and Matrix fans, that just doesn't happen. Don't depict your character doing dumb stuff that, again, makes guns look cooler or weirder than they actually are. Just have people use guns properly, the way you actually use guns. And then also use them in ways that encourage good handling. Don't have your character, I guess in a book this is something that's not going to matter as much, but in a movie, where you're actually seeing every little action that the character does. Don't have the character, make sure the actor isn't walking around pointing his gun at everyone, right? Make sure he uses proper firearm safety, because that's what anyone would do in real life in that same situation. Don't have him be pointing guns at people for fun, right? That's stupid. Similarly, don't have him walking around with his finger on the trigger, because again, no one does that. That's dumb, and we don't want to have people thinking that that's an okay thing to do, right? We want people to utilize proper firearm safety, and so show people using it in your films and in situations where those kind of details are relevant in books as well. Also, don't portray firearms as these crazy super weapons that you have to either be a villain or a Rambo to use. That's one of the reasons that they get bad press a lot of the time, is because people don't think that the average person is capable of safely handling a firearm. But the fact is, the average person is more than capable of safely handling a firearm, because safely handling a firearm is not that complicated. And so have people in your story who aren't necessarily Rambo, right? Who aren't necessarily super special ops trained guys, or even soldiers or cops, have guns. Because guess what? Look around you. Everyone, like here in America where I live, every house doesn't just have a gun. Every house has at least 5 to 10 guns, right? If not much, much more than that. So don't pretend that guns are super weapons. Portray them for what they are. They're weapons, and regular people can in fact use weapons. One way that I've done this in my writing is in my novel, A Damn Good Man, which is coming out in May 2025. I've got a character, the main character, is a 16-year-old homeschooler. But during most of the story, he's armed with both a rifle and a pistol. Because the fact of the matter is that a 16, 17-year-old homeschooler can, in fact, use those weapons if they've been taught how to use them. Because, again, using them is not that complicated. Another writer that I think does this very well is like Cormac McCarthy in his book, All the Pretty Horses. You've got 2 young teenagers just going off on an adventure, and they bring a rifle and a pistol with them because they're country boys and that's what they do. And it's not that big of a deal, right? Just because you have a gun doesn't mean you're on some kind of battle spree or killing spree. Like I said, guns are not like super weapons. They're items that cause an explosion that cause a bullet to go very quickly out the barrel. They can be used for hunting, for self-defense, for all kinds of things that don't necessarily involve super dramatic and intense shootouts. Another thing that's important to demonstrate is suppressive fire. Liberals will often advocate for banning weapons like the AR-15 because they'll be like, why on earth would you need a rifle with 30 rounds? And people who don't know anything about guns are going to be susceptible to that argument. But if you actually know a thing or two about combat, and you know what suppressive fire is, and you know that you often need it to win a combat situation, you need to be able to put up a high rate of fire on someone, if not to kill them, then to keep their heads down right now while you advance. And that's a critical combat use throughout the army and is very critical to any kind of relatively open combat that you could be in. So while it might not be relevant to your story if you're writing a story where the only combat that happens is 2 people with revolvers, right? But if you have any kind of larger gunfight, you need to demonstrate this principle so it becomes clear to people that semi-automatic and fully automatic firearms are not just about being able to kill more people, right? They serve a very important tactical purpose, and we don't want people thinking that civilians who own these guns have no reason for doing so. So that's why I have to say, just portray guns accurately as they ought to be used, not as super weapons that only villains and superheroes can use. Portray them for what they are. Average people can, in fact, use firearms, and of course show the different types being portrayed accurately. That way you have less people saying we need to ban semi-automatics. You may even have more people saying we don't need to continue our bans on fully automatics. And so if you portray guns accurately, you'll get more people taking on those kinds of positions. So yeah, while guns may not be quite as juicy of a topic to write about in literature as the existence of God or something, it's still a very relevant topic in the American political debate. And so I highly encourage you to take it seriously when writing guns in your work and not just go off willy-nilly, continuing the negative perception of firearms in media that in part leads to, I think, at least in part contributes to our gun violence issues in this country. That's all I got for today. God bless. Y'all have a good day.